Okay, I hope you had a nice break. We have 3 sessions ahead of us, a full day. So as you can see in your proceedings, the 3 sessions have a storyline. The first session is Understanding Ageism Across Cultures, Historical, Normative, and Rights-Based Perspective. So it's like a conceptual framework on ageism. And the second session will lead us to evidence-based approaches to ageism and explore the global evidence and sectoral realities in healthcare and employment. And the final session will lead us to how we can move ahead from awareness to action, strategies for combating ageism, and we will try to reconvene our session now. So, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce the moderator for our first session, Mr. Roland HONEKAMP, Deputy Head of Mission of the Delegation of the European Union to the Republic of Korea. Mr. HONEKAMP brings extensive diplomatic experience and deep understanding of human rights issues to guide our discussion. Please join me in welcoming Mr. HONEKAMP.
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind words. And again, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first panel today. We have a terrific panel ahead of us with 4 highly interesting and distinguished panelists. So in this panel, we try and explore the following theme: understanding ageism across cultures, historical, normative, and rights-based perspectives. And for this, obviously, it's important to know what we're talking about. So, in the academic discourse, I think ageism has been defined a long time ago. But I think what probably all of us converge on is basically that ageism means a set of negative attitudes we hold, but it's not enough to leave it there, because these attitudes then don't determine, but actually condition and shape or predispose then legal institutional norms that govern our societies, and also individual policies that are then adopted. So ageism, thus understood, obviously has basically now 30, 40 years history, and manifests itself across different cultures in different forms. And to do this and to explore this a little bit today, we have for you 4 panelists from different parts of the world. We have a perspective from Oceania, from Australia. We have one from Europe. We've got one from Korea here. And we also have a panelist from South America. So this promises to be very interesting, and I will now introduce the first panelist. Before I do this, just 1 or 2 housekeeping items. So I think we talk for each panelist will have like 15 or 20 minutes. And after these 4 presentations, we will then go into a short discussion among the panelists, and we also have good opportunity for Q&A. Considering this is the first panel, I think we are ready for a broad examination of the issues at stake. One last word of introduction, simply in terms of the pervasiveness of ageism and the increasing relevance of the problem. So where I come from in Europe, like 450 million people in the EU, roughly 90 million, so slightly more than 20% of the population now aged 65 and more. I think the same holds true approximately here in Korea. And even in the US, where you will think, younger society, yes, however, the trend is very clear. And also by 2050 in the US, we'll have 20% of the population aged 65 and above. So I think it's an increasingly important issue, and it deserves to be examined in international fora. So now let's go to our first panelist. This is Ms. Marlene Krasovitsky. May I please invite you up to the stage? Marlene is a board member of EveryAGE Counts and also a former consultant to the WHO. You've worked for the Australian government, and you've got a PhD from Sydney, so we're looking forward to your presentation.
Can you hear me? I can hear me now. It is a great honour to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of these important discussions. I've titled my session, The Long, Slow Road and Why I'm Optimistic. And I hope that over the course of my presentation, I will be able to outline my reasons for you. I'll cover three main areas: unmasking ageism, attitudes, norms, and cultural contexts. Secondly, responses, and here I will focus on language, framing and reframing. And thirdly, why I remain optimistic. But if I may begin with a story, please. In 2016, when I was a director at the Australian Human Rights Commission, I was invited to address the ASEM Expert Forum on the Human Rights of Older Persons. We had just concluded a national inquiry on discrimination in employment against older people, and it was called Willing to Work. We had conducted consultations around the country and had systematically unmasked the ageism, the stereotypes, prejudices, and discrimination being faced by older people, and the devastating financial, social, and well-being impacts of that ageism on their lives, on the broader community, and on our economy. I saw older persons' human rights being breached every day. Their right to work, their right to participate, their right to protection from discrimination. And I saw the impacts of those breaches on their income security, their physical and mental health, their sense of self, place, and value in the world. I was shocked at the extent and the depth of stereotyping, prejudices, and discrimination I saw and heard from people who were in work, who were looking for work, and from managers, recruiters, and human resources professionals. I was shocked at how unquestioned these assumptions were and how the discrimination just went unchallenged. And I was shocked that I had internalised so many of those same assumptions and beliefs. And I was shocked at the deafening silence on dealing with these norms that were creating and mindlessly reinforcing ageism, devaluing this stage of life and rendering older people invisible, irrelevant, or simply a burden. So we went about and we asked many thousands of Australians, how do you feel about getting older? What do you think we heard? Fear, dread, associations with decline, dementia, dependence, and death. Getting older is seen as a negative time of life. We deny getting old, we hide our age, we don't admit it. And then, of course, we saw the rhetoric and the pervasive narratives of the burden of disease, the burden of income support and pensions, the burden of intergenerational divides and conflicts. And we came to a very simple conclusion. Ageism is a barrier to ageing well. Since those days, research continues to confirm that ageism is widespread, deeply rooted, often invisible, and highly tolerated in a way that other isms are not. It's most often experienced for the first time in the workplace, followed very closely by in healthcare. That ageism has serious negative individual, social and economic impacts, and that ageism is an unfamiliar term. Further, we now know that the more ageist we are, the more likely we will condone elder abuse, and the more ageist we are, the less likely we are to recognise elder abuse. We know that labour force participation rates drop sharply with age, and the age at which employers start to see someone as an older worker is falling. Recent research tells us that some years ago it was people in their 60s were seen as older workers. Now it is people who are 50 or 51. And we see that health symptoms are dismissed or trivialised, and older people are made to feel invisible because, after all, what can they expect at their age? These are all tangible expressions of the ageism embedded in our cultural narratives, institutions and policies. And of course, we all benefited from the WHO's powerful, game-changing first global report on ageism and its subsequent global campaign to combat ageism, which I was later privileged to work on. This report woke us up and confirmed the prevalence and nature of ageism and its impacts with the devastating headline that 1 in 2 of us hold ageist views against older people. Now, I've spoken a lot about Australia, but I do want to talk about different cultural contexts. We all age in a cultural context. It's a truism to say that how we age is shaped by the norms and values embedded in our relationships, our institutions, our communities, and of course, within ourselves. These cultural values and beliefs also significantly impact how ageism manifests in different contexts. But of course, there is no one culture that characterises an entire country or region. Global, national, economic, cultural and social pressures bring with them vast variations. Just as there is no one way to age, there is no one way ageism will be experienced, and critically, therefore, no one way to combat ageism. But it's here that our knowledge starts to become a little thin. The WHO's first global report on ageism concluded that studies on ageism across countries and cultures are inconclusive and demonstrate the inadequacy of using broad geographical generalisations. Secondly, Professor Liat Ayalon's extensive work concludes that there is no consensus on the source of cross-cultural differences in the reports and experiences of ageism, but that interventions should be specifically tailored to change attitudes, behaviours and feelings in specific cultural contexts rather than a one-size-fits-all approach that originated in the West. So, to effectively tackle ageism, it's crucial to understand those cultural norms that shape how ageing and older people are perceived and treated. So given this complexity, ageism's deep roots and the imperative to change, how do we challenge and reframe these norms? This is where my optimism kicks in. Change is possible, and we know quite a bit how to go about it. We know, for instance, from the first global report on ageism, that the 3 evidence-based strategies to combat ageism are intergenerational connections, education, laws and policies, and that campaigning and advocacy hold much promise in shifting internalised, interpersonal and institutional ageism. But today I want to zero in on the attitudes and the norms I've spoken about, which lie at the heart of ageism. But let's start with what we know. We know we can shift attitudes, and there are many examples that we can call on. But a recent one from Australia, we conducted educational interventions on ageism, which resulted in statistically significant reductions in ageist attitudes, which held over time. For example, people rethought the way they spoke, their language that they used, the way they communicated. They opened up conversations about ageism. They thought about what they could do in their workplaces to change ageist attitudes. These were very, very powerful and replicable results. And of course, the WHO's new ageism scale provides us with a powerful tool to measure shifts in attitudes as a result of interventions. Secondly, we know what has worked with the other great social movements that have changed the way we think, act, and feel. Think about how our norms have changed to smoking, to diet, and big ones for us in Australia, sun protection and drink driving. We've learned from other great social movements like the disability rights movement, anti-racism movements, gender equality movements, and destigmatising mental illness. And we have seen changes to systems, policies, and laws result from these movements. And one of the enduring lessons that we have learned is that it takes time to shift social norms. We know that social change campaigns need to be long-term, need to be multifaceted, will shift over time, that we need to build momentum and advocacy, that we need to shift attitudes and policy. Thirdly, we know ways in which we can work with the media and urge the media to do better. Again, drawing from Australia, we had a recent report and we saw that media continues to to undervalue older people with their prevailing narratives of framing age as a problem, prevailing narratives of decline, frailty, vulnerability, and a real focus on intergenerational conflict. But there are moves to address these inadequacies, like improving access for the media to relevant spokespersons, providing resources and staff training, strengthening editorial standards, and shifting the narrative. And here's where I want to go a little deeper. We all know that language matters, and we know quite a bit about how to reframe messages. And there are some fantastic resources that are out there in terms of helping us to do that. We know that words matter. Simple changes are possible and necessary. For example, not othering older people, not talking about they, them, but us, we. Not using words or images that frame older people as vulnerable, dependent, or one big homogenous clump. But for today, I want to go back to the idea of framing and reframing and tie it back to cultural context. We did a small study and held workshops with older people in the community about framing and reframing messages to help them have conversations in their community about ageism. And during the workshops, participants contributed to co-designing alternative frames, and this is what they came up with. So rather than the existing frames of older people as a homogenous group, vulnerable, a burden, participants identified 5 alternative reframes. Firstly, look at people for who they are, not their age. This challenges the frame that older adults are a homogenous group, that age is an acceptable reason for discrimination, that age is a disability or a disease. Secondly, empower yourself and others to be true to yourself at any age. And this challenges the problematic frame that older adults are helpless. Ageing is a barrier to meaningful life. Thirdly, older adults contribute to society, which challenges the problematic frame that productivity is only valued as paid work, that older adults are a burden. And fourthly, we all engage in lifelong learning, and that challenges the very problematic frame that older people can't learn, especially new technologies. And lastly, ageism affects people at all ages, we're all in it together, and this challenges the frame that ageism only affects older people, age stereotypes and intergenerational conflict. And from these reframes, people went on to develop strategies to challenge ageism because they had a very nuanced view of what would work in different settings. Now, I quickly go through those frames just to demonstrate a point. These are the messages and values that underlie our attitudes in Australia and maybe some other Western nations. But these frames are very light, for instance, on filial piety, tradition, respect, reverence, social status, and hierarchy. Frames, and therefore, importantly, reframes, therefore, need to be embedded in the cultural context, which will certainly vary from these predominantly Western views. So in closing, after almost a decade since I was last here in Seoul, why am I optimistic? I know that we can change dominant cultural narratives and social norms that shape perceptions of ageing and older people. I am optimistic because I see local, national and a global movement to shift negative social norms about ageing and older people. I see research and evidence that we can change these norms, and how. I'm beginning to see nuanced research around cultural contexts, intersectionality and deep dives into what ageism looks like in different settings, workplaces, healthcare, education and so on. I see evidence-based initiatives and resources being developed in many different contexts and languages. I see research on the benefits of multi-generational workforces and age-inclusive workplaces for productivity and economies. And I see some shift in discourse and more challenging of unquestioned stereotypes. And the good news is because there are so many different cultural contexts and nuances, there are many ways to tackle ageism. For instance, a focus on intergenerational initiatives from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Nicaragua's Toy Project to Thailand's Sidekick program. I see social ventures to develop products and services and opportunities for people to empower them and improve their life, from Bolivia to Nepal. I see age-friendly initiatives in so many parts of the world, regional campaigns in Mozambique, Sudan, Rwanda, advocacy and amplifying the voices of older people through foundations, civil society organisations, older persons associations, ageism awareness days and initiatives to recognise and celebrate older people, like in Tanzania, Older People's Persons of the Year Awards in Chile and the Philippines, and events held by the Golden Years Foundation in Egypt. I see training for care workers and health professionals in Argentina on ageism, and funding for schools in New York to develop a curriculum on ageism for school children. I see innovative programs like your own ASEM's Global Ageing Centre's work on monitoring hate speech against older persons. I see shifting perceptions through the arts, theatre and culture, like Serbia's Age Against the Machine program. And of course, I see a dedicated focus to bringing into being a convention on the human rights of older persons, as well as existing regional instruments like the African Union Protocol and the Inter-American Convention. So yes, there is much to take heart from and to be optimistic about, but there are also threats and obstacles. For instance, many initiatives in advocacy are short-term, one-off, underfunded or unfunded, relying on the goodwill and often unpaid labour. Many initiatives are disconnected, and I fear there is considerable reinventing the wheel. The term ageism is still not widely understood or seen as relevant, or it is seen as a lesser harm. I see tired, lazy stereotypes and tropes in the media. I hear terribly ageist jokes which continue to go unchallenged. I see a lack of granular, age-specific data in so much research, which leads to sketchy evidence and bad policy. But when these barriers threaten to overwhelm me and my optimism fades, I recall the words of a very wise person I spoke to recently here in Korea, who said to me, "Marlene, you can't solve the problem of ageism all at once or in one way." Well said and so true. And the good news is that we have many avenues and many of us are pushing in the same direction. Our collective efforts will shift these destructive social norms. We have witnessed such shifts in other areas many times before. But one thing we can all do today, if we haven't already done so, is join the global campaign to combat ageism. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your insights in this presentation and your call to action. So values not only culturally contingent, but they vary within cultures. They're shifting, and also governments have a role, but also societies have a role. And so very interesting approaches. Let's now turn to our second panelist today. Actually, our panelists will participate, I understand, from Poland remotely, before we then, for the number 3 and number 4, again turn to the stage. But let me introduce Ms. Jolanta PEREK-BIALAS. She is a professor in Poland, both at the Jagiellonian University and also at the Warsaw School of Economics. And she is an economist, she's also a sociologist, and she has served as an expert on ageism issues with the European Commission, with the OECD, and the World Bank. So very happy to have you, Jolanta. Please, the floor is yours. 20 minutes.
Hear me?
Yes, very well.
Great. So just let me share the screen with the presentation. I hope that you can see as well the screen.
Yeah, I think it's very good, so please go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. And I would like to really congratulate for that event. I also, because of the demographic change and personal reasons, I could not be with you on site. It is really important to talk and to really get better understanding what we can do together to combat ageism. And already, thank you very much from the beginning. I'm with you, and especially the previous Marlene's speech. It is really great for me for the introduction. A very difficult challenge I received from the organizers to talk about ageism in Europe from the a little historical perspective, welfare states and evolving perceptions age. So my speech, as it is online, will be a bit shorter, but I still hope that it gives some insights for the discussion for today's event. As you will see, this is the Krakow. This is the beautiful city in Poland, the old one. And I do hope that somehow when we talk about the cultures, when we talk about the norms, values, it is somehow universal across the globe. My presentation will focus on 4 aspects. First of all, a little context of history. Even I know that in the room there are experts that know very well how and when it starts. Some also thinking and preparing the certain programs in Europe. We have to also remember that the welfare state shapes some actions if ageism could be found or not, and a kind of important information about perceptions of age and ageism, which also in case of the new possibilities to measure ageism, if it exists or not, will be important. And a few additional contexts for the future outlook. And maybe at the beginning, I would like to say that we should be optimistic, because otherwise all our efforts does not make sense. So I also truly believe that we can do something that the people from all ages will feel treated in a fair way. Coming to the little history, I think that at this 2025, it's important to remind that, in fact, the history of thinking or designing certain measures and policies linked to fighting with discrimination, it comes from the Council Directive from 2002, when the age was mentioned among other characteristics like, as you can see, religion, belief, disability, sexual orientation. And in fact, in particular, it was mentioned in the high level of employment and social protections. However, already when we can have a look at this important document, this directive does not apply to social security and social protection schemes. And I would like to refer to that in a minute. However, already in this document, we have exactly for the purpose of this directive, the principle of equal treatment, which shall mean that there shall be no direct or indirect discrimination, and defining direct, indirect discrimination in this document as well could be found with mostly, as we already can see even in that first way of thinking, that it was mostly linked to the equal treatment in employment and occupation, which directly puts a lot issues that this directive applies as obliged under national legislation to take appropriate measures in line with the principles contained in Article 5 in order to eliminate disadvantages entitled by such provision, criterion, or practice. In this context, when we mostly fought in Europe at the beginning, of course, now it's changed the labor market, we already know that these welfare states and ages, it's much differs. I separated for two policies. One is the employment policy, when we have a certain measures which can directly help with fighting with ages. They're just examples of two projects in which I'm involved. One was extending working lives with the colleagues from Sweden, UK, and Germany. And also the Futures financed by the Horizon 2020, when we also in one of work packages were looking at the ageism aspects, which can be noticed in different measures linked to the labor market. But as a case of Poland mentioned, already we know that the Europe and even some regulation could be found or interesting as a universal, but already in case of Poland, and I always try to remind that, for example, women can go on retirement at the age of 60, while the men at 65. So already, even there are some certain directions, the countries in Europe are different, not only by, it was mentioned, the context of national legislations, but we already know that diversity is linked to the regions and also at the local level, to which I will come back in a minute. So in fact, the ages, if we even stick to labor market, can be found in different aspects. When in employment policy, there are some measures which can promote or not give so many chances to older workers or even younger workers to participate fully in certain benefits of the market. But what do we know in Europe? What kind of the inspiration I can share you in so short message? We have a lot of various data and research. Just as example of a survey of health, aging, and retirement in Europe, which is somehow a kind of the link to health and retirement survey, which was first a kind of the inspiration. But even in the European social survey, there were some modules in which we could catch perceptions of ageism and how we can measure. But of course, there's a lot of publications, different ones, as we have European networks, not only like EveryAGE, which brought a fantastic early stage researchers working on the topic, not only in the labor market, but also in healthcare, in media, with technology, and also cost actions initiatives, finance via the European funds, and just even one of the recent still going on like DigiNet or EveryAGE. And we try to talk about the ages in different contexts via different videos like TEDx and so on. But even so, and today was already mentioned, the initiatives of WHO, we already know that somehow we can try to catch ages, for example, in the labor market. It is one of the from the quite well known book also mentions today name of Professor Liat Ayalon and Clemens Tesch Romer as editors, but as well the initiative, and I do appreciate the efforts of WHO for the new tool for measuring ages, which could bring more standardized possibility to catch ages. And why we think that it's still an issue in Europe? Because one of the results of Eurobarometer report found that in fact 45% of Europeans are convinced that age discrimination as being perceived as too old or too young is widespread in the European Union. Here you can see the Science for Policy brief, which can give more insights, but even already more than 50% of Europeans mention age as the main criteria that may put a candidate at a disadvantage during a recruitment process. And what we also know from that study, that a 5 percentage point increase compared with the previous Eurobarometer survey in 2019. So what do we do not know yet? And this is something what I would like to somehow, when I was thinking about my speech during this event, based on my experience and the recent different thoughts and actions, I think that we still, and I know that the other globe is maybe some more advanced with some better acceptance of technology, but we still in many countries in Europe, we really do not know how the interactions will go on and if and what kind of the forms of ages could be found, not only on a human relations and conflicts, and was mentioned directly the communication, but also with non-human and how it will be not create additional challenges. But in fact, I also would like to mention one of the projects in which with the colleagues from Germany and UK we are involved. It's also showing that due to demographic change, and we already know that also the other countries like Korea, but in Europe as well, in Central Eastern Europe and in Poland in particular, we know that there will be less and less younger persons, which creates the tensions for securing the care for older dependent family members. One of the projects that we have a more social roles, like not in being in education, but also in the work, we need to know the way how also support and not to create additional bad perceptions of being overburdened. And it has to be done by a very creative and a very inclusive communication when we have less younger people and more older people, and doing everything to keep them as long active as possible. In that way, if we talk about the new way to reduce ages, and I really was impressed how many great examples were mentioned by Marlene in the speech before me. But of course, I also would like to mention the initiative, and WHO today is quite a few times mentioned. And I know that also there is the speaker from WHO today in the second session, Alana. But I believe that somehow at the local level, we can do a lot. And one of the initiatives, which I would like to say that I'm really proud that the Jagiellonian University is involved, in supporting Polish cities and communities from urban, but as well from rural area, which are already officially registered to global network of age-friendly cities and communities of WHO, to work with them with sharing the knowledge, experience, initiatives, projects, programs. Already they organized a study visit to see how, in what way to communicate, to prepare the local societies, communities to reduce ages. The other example, which also you might be noticed on my screen, the logo of City and Co project, which is also linked to this age-friendly initiative. And also we have a different local initiatives thanks to the research on the local level. When we talk with the older citizens, what could make cities do to make the place age-friendly. And so this is the end, or maybe not the end. I think that in the past we mostly thought about one way of ages when it goes. But in fact, currently there is more than one way, and this ways depends on our approach. But I agree that norms, values, and preparations are needed. But unfortunately, also we have to realize that ageism, it's not a single way to inequality, but are more parallel roads, which can give even can produce more and more inequalities. And this is something what we have to remember and somehow have to find solutions. As I mentioned, at the local level, then we will stop, for example, healthcare disparities, social exclusions, and digital divide, which is also observable. In this way, I would like to thank you for your attention and for listening my short input online. I know that's not the same, so I really apologize for that again, and some publication which can be inspiration for further work, and some invitation for joint project and research also, including the ageism aspects. Thank you very much for the attention, and I'm happy to participate in the further event today with possibility to maybe answer some questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jolanta, for this view from Europe. And we can hear you very well. It's almost as if you are here. So please stay online and participate in our panel going forward. So interesting views from Europe here. Not only how language or societies impact on norms, but also what governments can do. Also, ageism transcends, simply the issue of participation in the labor market. It also affects, we've seen recently, political or election campaigns. And as you pointed out, so even urban development and other things are at stake here. So very interesting, and a further unpacking of the complexities of ageism here. Let's now turn, after Australia and Europe, let's now turn to our host country, to Korea. And our next panelist is here, Professor Joo-yeon Kim. She is a professor of social sciences at Changnam National University and specialized in family sociology, social policy. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kim. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It is my honor to present at the 5th ASEM Forum on Human Rights of Older Persons. I'm from 충남 University, and today I'll be talking about a multi-dimensional approach to ageism in Korea. So there was a rapid transformation in Korean society, and also the same can be said of rapid transformation of older adult social status. So since the industrialization, there was a decline of a traditional Confucian values such as filial piety and respect for elders and weakening of family ties, and also that brings to age-based social discrimination, rise of ageism discourse, and also we witness age-based disparities in wages and job status in the labor market, increasing burden of care, old age, dependency, unstable family relations, and cases of abuse, unfortunately. And also, at the moment, there's a negative perception around older persons, which is not limited to the problems of individual persons. I think because Korean society really emphasizes the productivity of individual persons, and that's why. So today, I would like to talk to you about how ageism is witnessed in Korean society and also research results along the way. So I hope that I can provide you with an opportunity to have a deeper understanding about ageism in Korea. So there's a rise of successful aging marked by anti-aging or productive aging. So positively, it frames older adults as active contributors to society. However, as I mentioned earlier, because the Korean society puts productivity at the top of our hierarchy, which raises concerns over very important issues. So such values are reflected upon older persons as well. So aging is a very natural process for human beings, and also that overemphasis on independence may hinder social understanding of our later stage life dependency and vulnerability, and also it does not give us opportunities to really contemplate about opportunities for older persons. So I think all these results, the older persons or individual persons are blamed for it. So I believe that, of course, reinforcing ageism through its discourse is meaningful. However, I think it also excludes those older persons who are lagging behind and who are not up to the standards. And I believe that this becomes yet another discrimination against the older person. So from now on, I would like to share with you my results in research. As you know, in the past, in order to bring this issue of ageism to the fore, we used to develop the objective indicators exposing gender disparities, and also we should be doing the same in order to come up with the policy measures. I think we really need to verify the objective conditions of age-based discrimination to bring the issue to light and guide the policy responses. So a macro-level ageism index that assesses the differences in living conditions between older adults and other age groups are needed, and also it will gauge the structural disparities attributable to advanced age. So that's what I developed that will help us to further examine the situations around older persons, and also will help us to examine the status of Korea in this arena. So this index is categorized into 5 different the categories, and please refer to the table. So the first one is employment status, economic status, poverty rate, social discrimination, etc. Please refer to the table. So when it comes to social status, there's a voting rate, participation rate, and also participation in humanitarian activities, the use of our personal computers. So we have to take multifaceted approaches. By doing so, I think we can compare ourselves with other countries. So these indicators, for example, have used very official data from international organizations like OECD and also WHO and etc. So based on this age indexes, this is the result comparing 15 different OECD countries. So this will help us examine the ageism in different sectors. So the blue refers to Korea. So ageism, Korea ranked quite high, meaning that ageism is quite serious in Korea. So it is highly likely for all the persons in Korea to experience ageism. So in this case, Spain is sitting at the bottom, and also the Poland is sitting at the top in terms of health status. Japan is relatively sitting at the lower ranks, and also Spain is again sitting at the very top in terms of environmental status, and also in the social participation status, Turkey recorded the highest number, meaning that the older persons in Turkey is having difficulties for economic participation. So I think we need to really be careful in interpreting this table. For example, I told you that economic status, South Korea is sitting at the very top, meaning there's a dire situation for older persons. But when it comes to employment status, the South Korea is sitting at the very bottom. It means that we are less likely to really discriminate older persons in Korea in terms of employment status. However, we should be very careful of interpreting this data because employment rate is reflected upon this employment status. As is already mentioned, when we talked about economic status, there's a serious poverty among the older persons. However, employment rate among older persons is quite high. So we are in a very complicated situation where although employment rate of older persons is high, but they are likely to suffer from poverty. So by having this ranks, I would like to touch upon overall ageism score in OECD countries. South Korea is ranked 4th place, following Turkey, Poland, and Estonia. Lower, the better, I told you. But here, Japan is sitting at the very bottom, meaning that ageism situation is relatively really better off in Japan. So it is not just about individual experiences, it is deep-rooted in society as a social norm. So let me move on to second research. I try to understand this ageism from a different perspective. So I developed age sensitivity indicator. So I'm sure you know what the gender sensitivity is. So age sensitivity is in the same context. So I wanted to understand the differences in experiencing ageism among different age groups. So social understanding, social empathy to better understand about the ageism. I developed this age sensitivity indicator. So this indicator has already been developed. I have used it, and then I have reorganized detailed items in this indicator, and also I have gone through Delphi indicator as well. So by doing so, I just wanted to really examine the situation of a specific age group which is suffering from ageism. For example, residence, education, labor, and asset, and the legal rights or social participation. So there are 9 different categories, and also there are over 40 different items below. And also here there is a lot of different secondary data which I borrowed from official organizations. There's a huge amount of data was needed, so I really needed to use a methodology to refine this abundant data. So indicator value is a bit complicated. A higher indicator value is sensitivity is high, meaning that within the population there's a consistency. So when this indicator value is lower, there's a huge gap among different age groups, meaning that we need to make more efforts to address ageism in that situation. So in 46 different items, all those boxes are red, and these red bits are the items which has a huge the gap in ageism, and also white boxes and blue boxes are referring to the situation where the ageism is well balanced. So as you can see, the most of the items, it shows that there's a huge gap among different age groups when in terms of ageism. For example, victims of cyberbullying and also victims of ageism, especially you can see huge gap, and also children are vulnerable groups here. And when it comes to the rights exemption and also basic livelihood security rate, it turned out that young people are victims, and also the older persons, for example, health and also access to education, social isolation. There are so many sectors where they turned out to be vulnerable. And of course, the extent of their vulnerability were very different from other age groups. So we have to consider this in order to come up with the better policies. And maybe we need to really come up with the policy measures which it takes all these situations into consideration to target specific age group for policies. And the next research is quite interesting, and I have used a photo voice method. And I just wanted to say that the image of older persons is how it is portrayed by young people. So the photo voice method, you might not be familiar with this method. So I have used the photos, and then nowadays young people are quite familiar with media, right? And coming under this method, they'll be able to really look deep into their minds, how they are perceiving older people, what ideas they have, and what perception they have towards older persons. In order to really have a better understanding of those perceptions, I think we need to use this kind of a methodology. So in the future, I hope that this helps intergenerational connection, intergenerational communications.
연구 방법은
So this is how we conducted the study, and the participants were college students, and for 1 month, they used their mobile phones to take photographs on the theme of images of older adults. And we had 3 workshops and 5 focus group discussions so that they can share how they think about the images of older adults and how they face reality as older adults in Korea. But it was in the second half of 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic situation was severe. So most of them were conducted online. But it was a very well organized study as you see on the screen. So it would be interesting to see the photos. And as a result of the study, the youth recognized older adults as someone different from them. So these are pictures taken by participants, and they also gave titles to the photos themselves. And they explained these photos, and we could recognize how they have been otherizing the older adults. And this is something called ASEM combo. And it is alcohol and snack enjoyed by older adults, and they were using these items to distinguish themselves from older generation. And in case of adult diapers and fallen leaves, and it presented the dependency of older adults because of dementia. And they also described that it would crush their dignity. So they are recognizing death not as a natural process of life. They believe that death is a negative experience where their dignity is crushed. And these are other pictures. And we talked about discrimination and habitual exclusion against older adults. The first one is the customer-centered, which is the same as user-centered. As you see in the first picture, we conveniently use the kiosk, which is a customizable service. However, it is not comfortable for older adults to use this kind of new technologies. It was presented by college students. And another example is exclusion from welfare, which is the example of a public Wi-Fi. And even though this is a welfare, universal welfare for everyone, this kind of technology serves only part of the population. And the last one, the title is The Corner Table. And one student went to the restaurant, and the staff gave a corner table to older adults, and he saw it, and he took the picture of the scene, and it showed the exclusion against older adults by sending them to somewhere less visible. And these are last examples I brought. And they participated in the photo voice study for 2 months, and they showed changes from in their attitude. They could find something new about older adults. And the first photo, which is titled "Love That Never Fades," portrays an older adult bringing food to her son. So it represents the love of older adults. And the second picture is the bent pine tree, which is more expensive than the straight pine tree. And it depicts the unique values of older adults, which is a new perception acquired by the student. And the last one is the early bird. At dawn, there are many older adults moving around in the park. So the college student learned that there is something they could learn from older adults. And what I would like to emphasize here is that the negative images and perception on older adults are related to the very concrete episodes or individual experience. However, positive images are mostly relying on symbolic or abstract notions. That means that negative experiences are more widespread, and there are less experience for them to internalize positive images of older adults. That is why we have to promote positive images of older adults through concrete intergenerational exchange. And the last point I would like to make is about the perception study of ageism and aging society among high school students in Japan and Korea. It was a comparative study, and it was an online study. If you see the outcome of the study, we talked about the perception of a prejudice and discrimination toward older adults, and Korean students were strongly recognizing discrimination toward older adults compared to Japanese high school students. And on top of that, we also talked about ageist behavior toward older adults among the two groups. And when we compare Japan and Korea, the blue line represents Korea and the orange line represents Japan. There are items such as avoiding conversation with older adults, and the perception is not the end. It is translated into their action. We could find it from the study. That is why in the future, we have to improve the perception, not only the perception, but also we have to design new types of behavior for teenagers in Korea. And this is the summary of the study. The perception and experience among Korea and Japan are different. That is why I believe that Korean students are more sensitive to discrimination toward older adults. However, it shows that Japan has a higher anxiety over the potential later life. So now we have the 100-year life era. So the expectations for the 100-year life era, the Japanese students were more expectant about this. So I believe that in Japan, the education was given much earlier compared to Korea because they have a higher awareness. So according to this study, the Japanese high school students have a higher understanding of ageism and aging society based on the education that led to the outcome of our study as previously presented. So these are diverse exploration and projects we have conducted. And I would like to present 3 directions. The first one is the age integration. We have to reduce inequalities between age groups so that we can move beyond generational divides. And the second one is we have different challenges over the life course, such as aging and income decrease. But this is not something abrupt in later life. It is cumulative life course challenges. That is why we have to think about the proper policy and measures. And the third one is the age-sensitive perspective. We have to not only focus on gender mainstreaming, but also the age mainstreaming strategies. And while conducting these studies, I came up with a question. So I would like to conduct a follow-up study as well. So when we achieve equitable conditions across age groups, do you believe we can overcome ageism, reduce age-based hostility, and foster the social inclusion of older adults? That is a question, because currently in Korea, it is much more complex than these conditions. That is why, to advance the values of age integration and intergenerational solidarity, we need a more careful reflection on this matter. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Kim, and thank you for sharing your empirical research, your work in this area. So the index and the age sensitivity indicator, all this is important, I think, not only for rational or methodological policy making, but also should there be international efforts, obviously they need to be based on mutually accepted criteria. So thank you very much. We now turn to our fourth panelist, this time from Latin America, but also from Geneva, Ms. PEREL-LEVIN. Please join me on the stage here. She is currently vice chair of an NGA committee on aging in Geneva, and also you're dealing with the United Nations a lot in Geneva. You are the main representative there for the international network for the prevention of elder abuse. So please join us on the panel and share your thinking with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you very much, ASEM and the Global Center for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here today. And good morning, everyone. I am an older woman. I also define myself as an advocate for the human rights of older persons. I represent, as the moderator said, the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse and the International Longevity Center Global Alliance at the UN in Geneva. I am currently the Vice Chair of the NGO Committee on Aging and represent the NGO Committee on Aging at the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, GAROP. So thank you again for inviting me to be a discussant in this important session with such excellent presentations. And so my role here is to discuss and perhaps summarize a bit what was said. And what is them here? There. Okay, I will carry, so I will summarize or bring up the themes that most resonated with me. And I try to explain a bit what, and I have the thought, okay. So, what we can say, we can see from the three presentations, that ageism is universal, even if some of the expressions differ. So because they differ, the expressions, also the local solutions and activism also may differ. However, I want to mention that the human rights are also universal. So whatever our local expressions or activities, they cannot undermine the universal principles that underpin human rights. So national governments need to comply with their commitments. Korea, in fact, has ratified all treaties, the universal treaties, human rights treaties. So whenever you work on ageism, on age-based discrimination, you cannot undermine the treaties that you have already signed. We know what has worked with other movements, as Marlene mentioned, and what has contributed to change. But I want to make the point here that beyond the mobilization and the social movements, really what has made it work is also the treaties. For example, what has contributed to smoking cessation more than anything else was the adoption of the legally binding Framework Convention for Tobacco Control, FCTC. Sometimes it's the social movement that brings about the change in legislation, but sometimes it's the other way around. It's the legislation that really creates, together with the education, the change. So the change in attitudes, for example, towards persons with disabilities, no question that CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, contributed to the change of paradigm and even to the investments by development agencies into programming into persons with disabilities. Persons who use seatbelts today, we could not even imagine to be in the car without seatbelts, but believe me, when I was a child, we didn't use one. And that the fact that it is illegal not to use one, that makes it everybody using it. Most people, because we don't, we are penalized. And many more examples like that, that the importance of the legislation, because education alone doesn't work. It works better alongside legally binding instruments and vice versa. Reframing language. We talk about reframing language on the interpersonal level, but I also want to make the point, the importance of reframing language at the macro level. Expressions like the aging tsunami, the ticking bomb, time bomb, the framing aging as a negative, scary experience that may justify extreme actions by those in power. It is not a question of alternative framing, because to frame it as an alternative means that the other one is also acceptable. It's not about acceptable. We have to eradicate ageist language and not consider ageist language as an alternative. We really have to eradicate the language that perpetuates assumptions, the feelings and behaviors, including ageist policies that we have many. We need to move from demographic threat to demographic resilience with evidence-based human rights policies that are inclusive and sustainable. From chronological age to perspective age, from age-related dependency to economic dependency ratios. And here I'm quoting Alana Armitage from UNFPA, and she has a chapter in my book. But the importance is that everything that we say, and we really need to watch what we say and how we frame at the macro level, because that has a direct influence in how individuals perceive. Reframing the portrayal of older persons in the media and entertainment industries, as was mentioned by all of our speakers, not as gray, frail, and vulnerable, but also not an image of a superactive, beautiful, rejuvenated, successful, totally independent older person that ignores the heterogeneity and the lived realities of older persons in all their diversity. Disaggregated data, we need it, disaggregated data that makes sense. It's an imperative for inclusive policies. Data that aggregates all older persons in 60 or 65 and above assumes that all older persons are the same. Data must be properly disaggregated by age, sex, and relevant socioeconomic characteristics. Age sensitivity was mentioned, promoting intergenerational relations. We must avoid generalizations based on one personal experience, as we saw in some of the experiences brought by young people, or isolated negative incidents to justify ageist attitudes. Intergenerational activities cannot be one-off intervention, as they may have the opposite effect of what actually was intended. The language of fairness, which is now quite in fashion in Europe, in the Europe discussion, is a dangerous discussion. It moves us away from the solidarity and equity towards fueling an intergenerational conflict that may not have been there in the first place. There is a discussion going on about being fair, and in fact, by being fair, they mean that they're blaming older persons from taking all the resources and taking away the jobs from the young, etc., etc. So we cannot go there. We shouldn't go there. I lost myself. Okay. So I was saying that, yes, and the use, I really was happy in seeing the photo voice, because I'm also involved also, and in fact, my first profession was community theater. So I really support the use of art, the use of creative methods to analyze our levels of hidden, invisible ageism. In fact, using art is the best way to unmask a lot of our prejudice. So photo voice was an example, and I thank you for that. And where do I go back? There. So we need to eradicate also age-based discrimination in the labor market that was brought by all, including access to training for older workers. Also, with intention, we also have to eradicate the idea that because most older people don't use technologies, that doesn't mean that we cannot learn how to use new technologies, but we are discriminated in that we don't receive training, because we are discriminated against in the workplace as well, as we are about to retire. The Council Directive 2078 was mentioned about against age discrimination in the workplace. And Yolanda mentioned that really doesn't include social protection, social security, but in fact also the directive says it shall be without prejudice to national provisions laying down retirement ages. That means that countries still impose arbitrary retirement ages in most countries. And that is something that we have to move away from. The way forward is to move towards flexible retirement and involving what the person wants or can do. And also the age-friendly citizen communities and the need for a human rights framework that underpins all communities. And when I talk about not age-friendly, but age-inclusive citizen communities for a complete, a real age-inclusive world. So often, good intentions harm. Good policies, they have unintended ageist consequences. Increased protections, the independent expert mentioned, moving away from only protection. So increased protections without the inclusion of the voice of people concerned may result in increased stigma and a violation of the autonomy. Arbitrary guardianship laws, old age, and the only determinant of capacity and dependence reinforces the preconceptions and stereotypes and may violate older persons' rights. And in fact, older persons feel or indeed become vulnerable when their autonomy is taken away. And advanced directives and living wills that cannot be updated by the older person themselves, or the mandatory support obligating families to look after their older relatives, also they are measures that may increase abuse. And here I mentioned the book that I edited, Aging of the Oppressed, when I talk about what Paulo Freire said in the 70s about the importance of conscientization, of really becoming aware of the contents of our own agency. We don't just contribute to society, we are real agents in society, and that we need that real dialogue. We have to move away from the false generosity, against false generosity, into a real dialogue. And we talked about intersections and the intersections that are part of aging, but really the issues of pensions. If you are in poverty, the majority of the world doesn't receive a pension. And those who receive a pension cannot live out of that pension because they are not dignified pensions. Disability, I mentioned the intersection of disability and ageism and ableism and mentalism. And we have to move away from the medicalization of ageism, because really that is what the disability movement achieved. Don't look at us as sick people. We may have a disability, but look at what I can do, not just what I cannot do. And the same is with aging. Let's not just look at the biology of aging. Let's look at what the persons can do. And I am very slow. So human rights as well is not a one-off, it's not a nice thing to have, it's an obligation. Member states sign, they have the obligation to respect, to protect, and fulfill the human rights for all, including in old age. And we have ample evidence that was gathered in New York, in Geneva, and everywhere, that a UN Convention on the Human Rights for Older Persons is the way to go ahead in order to bring about that access to justice that older persons so lack. That we also have a place, a committee that all the other treaty bodies have.
저희 위원회도 마련이 되어 있습니다. 이제 모든 협약에 관련해서 이제 논의를 할 수가 있고, 이제 회원국들의 활동이 감시가 되고, 이제 정책을
They implement the human rights of older persons. So all of this is changing what the things that I said before, that older persons have no access, they have nowhere to complain. It's changing, and the independent expert also mentioned this resolution and the session of the Human Rights Council 58/13 that was really last April, calling for the Council to establish an intergovernmental working group to elaborate the text of a convention, of a legally binding instrument to protect and promote the human rights of older persons. That is a change. It's a change maker. And that is me, you see in the picture, on the day that was adopted with several members, ambassadors, and we, civil society, were very much involved in the process, both in New York, in Geneva. We are involved in the negotiations on the resolution, and we will be involved in the drafting of the text. And we do hope that from Korea and from every country in the world, people at the ground can also be involved and participate, because that convention will belong to all of us. And I think I will end here because I am already over time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. PEREL-LEVIN. So very interesting. You touched upon many aspects our previous speakers raised. You're clearly, certainly still evolving and perhaps also emerging field, many complexities. So you close with a call for action on a convention. We now, before we break for lunch at 12:15, we got a few moments for questions from the audience. So if you would like to make points, ask questions, or engage with our panelists, this would be a good opportunity. So may I ask whether anyone would like to take the floor? You can also think about what you've just heard and whether anything comes to your mind. In the meantime, perhaps I will ask our panelists one question. So, I mean, the comparison to social movements, persons with disabilities and race and gender questions, and also the drive towards a convention. So all of these, reflects a desire to go ahead on a rights-based approach. So if you look at some of the discussions in the G7 or even in the G20 in recent years, to bridge a little bit and to become inclusive, comprehensive, as encompassing as possible, to include China, and we also have many representatives from Southeast Asian countries here. So there's this new concept of human dignity, which is perhaps slightly softer. Is that also something, can I ask the panelists, is that also something that is of relevance in this debate? Or would you say the parallel is very clear, it has to be rights-based?
Not sure what the question is. Should we use dignity as part of that? Is that?
Yeah, it's the parallel to traditional rights-based approaches, as for instance reflected in the drive towards a convention. Is that the right thing to do, or should this debate, also given it's quite complex, quite broad, should it be perhaps slightly softer and based on something like human dignity?
If I may start. We have tried softer approaches for so many years. We have been told over 15 years of discussions at the UN in New York, older persons are adults. There are treaties that they deal with adults, and we should use existing mechanisms. We have tried, and it doesn't work. I received answers from developing agencies in Europe telling me we do not invest in programming on aging because we are not required to, because there is not a hard law requiring us to invest in aging. So yes, we should be included, but the reality has shown us that it doesn't, that the soft approach doesn't work. That really, the evidence shows that legislation and conventions, that is what really has moved things forward, together with software and with education and with the change of attitudes on the media. But again, the media will not change unless somebody tells them that it's illegal to use ageist jokes like they have been told about women. And you don't see anti-feminist or sexist jokes anymore because they are not allowed to. But suddenly, being ageist is not only tolerated, it is legal.
I completely reinforce and back up what our esteemed colleague has said. I would say that our human rights do not diminish as we age, but in the very, very careful analysis of existing human rights treaties and instruments, there have been many, many gaps identified in terms of inconsistent application on the human rights of older persons, as well as blind spots, let's call them. So without an explicit commitment and legal obligation to protect and promote the human rights of older persons, we will continue to faff around in this very grey area. And the other response I would make is that our right to dignity is but one of our human rights. And for me, the right to dignity has a connotation which is still associated with the vulnerability of older persons. And we need to move from that frame to seeing older persons as active agents and upholding their human rights across all areas of their human rights.
Thank you very much. Yolanda, you've got your screen switched on. Would you also like to intervene?
Right, but I know that we have only 2 minutes and everything is on time. So I also would like to thank you for the opportunity at the end to say shortly, we need these actions. but what is very important that we also need to include in a very creative way younger generations. So the example from Korea, the study, but also the different learning activities about showing not only by words how the old age can look like, but also by actions, by good examples, the real activity, the real actions. Because I think that the older generations somehow know how to deal. We have these solutions, we have this recommendation, but it's a huge challenge to engage younger generations, which we already now have a lot of different challenges, also because of technology. So that's my idea at the end, and my kind of the last word, that with the ageism, we need really engage all generations and mostly focus also on that younger one that are not still old or feel older. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yolanda. And I'm being admonished to conclude on time. It's 12:15. I think the Professor Kim, we will slightly exceed, even though, so I will ignore being admonished. Please go ahead.
1분만 말씀드리겠습니다.
So I will just speak for 1 minute. As you mentioned in your comments, right, the progress of global human rights has been done, the progress-wise, overall perspective. So as I mentioned earlier, the attention to ageism started from older persons. I think in order to integrate multi-generations from ageism, I think we need to equally pay attention to characteristics of different age groups. As I mentioned in my presentation, for example, evenness among multi-generations would not necessarily address ageism, because ageism is having a lot of complicated elements behind. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for these additional remarks. So I think our panelists have managed to explore many different aspects of ageism. Even at different questions, given us some conceptual clarity. Also, obviously, have come up with empirical approaches, certain methodologies, how to measure these issues, a basis for future policy making, questions what also can be done in the international context. So clearly an emerging, interesting field where many things remain to be done. So please join me in thanking our four panelists. That was really an excellent discussion. Thank you.